All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to what is today? Thursday. Oh, it's a short week, right? So it's going to seem like all the days are jumbled up. But that's good because that means tomorrow's Friday and we get a weekend, which is good because again, we don't want to strain ourselves on the first day, right? Give me a second here. I'm just going to move my computer a bit. Still trying to figure out the best way to do this. Okay, so in terms of online, only Jesse's here this morning so far, but good morning to you, Jesse. Yeah, let's jump into where we were yesterday. Now, we were talking about yesterday some of this theoretical stuff, some critical theory and theory of knowledge. Again, it's kind of complicated stuff, and it's a little bit dry, it's a little bit boring, right? But stick with me. It will get more interesting and exciting very shortly. We just have to kind of deal with the theory part. The theory is always the worst, right? The theory is always boring. But you kind of need it to, to understand things later. So yesterday we started off kind of with our first official class. We talked about what social justice was, and it was kind of the idea that it's based in human rights and the idea that everyone is of equal worth, even though we're all unique people. We're of equal worth, and therefore everyone deserves the same opportunities and resources and access to those resources as everyone else, right? And so we should probably point out here, because I think some people get confused, but we're not talking about making everything equal, right? We're not talking about trying to make sure that everyone has exactly the same and everyone is exactly the same, because that's kind of impossible, right? Everyone's always going to be unique. There's always going to be people who are better at things than others, and they will kind of excel, right? And so we're never going to have things perfectly equal, and I don't really think we want things perfectly equal, right? But we do want to remove inequalities, especially when they are only connected to people's social identities, right? Their race, their gender, their ethnicity. Those are the kind of things that we don't really want, right? But yeah, we don't want to get confused. We're not talking about perfect equality here, right? We're talking about equal access to resources and opportunities, and so that we get rid of inequalities that are unjustified. Okay, and we can talk about that sort of justification a little bit later if you want. So, sorry, I just got distracted by something I saw. We said that yesterday we were going to take a critical approach, meaning we were going to assume that society was stratified, and indeed I think we pretty clearly understood that it was, right? There was some people on the top with lots of money and resources and power, and people on the bottom with not so much, and then there's people in the middle, right? I think we kind of understand that. But we talked about these two ideas, that our perception of the world aren't the same, and that sometimes knowledge is counterintuitive, right? And so, actually I'm just going to back up a little bit. So we said our perceptions weren't the same, and part of that had to do with positionality, right? Part of that had to do with the fact that we all kind of occupy different places in society based on our social groups, right? So our gender, our race, our ethnicity, our sexuality, our citizenship status, our socioeconomic status, right? So how much kind of money and power we have. We all kind of sit in a different place, and so we all kind of view society differently, right? We all kind of see things a little bit differently. And that's kind of that's the idea of positionality, right? The idea that we are, because of how society kind of treats us, we kind of see society in a different way. I'm just going to take a second because I feel like, oh, good morning, Kayla. I'm just going to take a second because I feel a little bit like I feel like it's hard to like chain thoughts together at the moment. Um, how'd yesterday go? Was it good? Yeah? Other classes are okay? Um, I want to ask, maybe I'll ask a little bit later if there's some more people here, but is everyone okay with getting their vaccination status? Because I think we need that for next week, right? Yeah? Is everyone okay? And do you know how to get that little vaccine card from the BC?
Oh, I don't have the passport yet.
Oh yeah, you don't have it yet, but do you know how to do it?
Yeah, I haven't done that.
Okay, but you can figure it out, right?
Yeah.
You're not confused or lost. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was gonna say we could take a little bit of time to figure that out. At the break or the end of class. If you need some help, I'll try to direct you. I kind of figured it out yesterday, so I got mine. So I feel good. But I just want to make sure that everyone's okay with figuring out how to do that. It's pretty easy, but
I might also get vaccinated again.
yeah.
That way.
Did you get one or did you get two?
I got two back home.
Okay.
Yeah, I might get more again because bear in mind.
Because which one did you get?
I got a Sinovac,
Uh-huh.
Coronavac back home.
Yeah.
2 doses already, but I think I might get like a booster or like another round of
Okay.
vaccine.
I think I don't know. I guess that's okay. I've never really heard about, like, most of the news now is kind of taken up by people who don't want to get vaccinated, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I haven't really thought about someone who might want to get like extra vaccinated. I'm sure it's fine, but you should probably check with a doctor or something first just to make sure.
Nurse Claire said it was okay.
She did? Okay,
Yeah.
that's good enough then. Okay, yeah. If you have questions about that, though, you can ask me, and I'll do my best to help you. Okay, hopefully that's enough to get my mind right. So yeah, we said that where we stand in society influences how we are perceived and the experience we have, right? And so again, walking down the street as one person is not quite the same as walking down the street as another person, right? We all have a slightly different experience of it, okay? And then the last thing we said is sometimes knowledge was counterintuitive, right? And so counterintuitive meant that it went against our common sense, right? Or it went against our intuition. And so I used this example yesterday of the flat earth, which we all kind of chuckled at. But then I tried to point out to you that, of course, our experience of the world is that it is flat, right? It feels flat. It looks flat if you look out the window. Actually, this kind of a good view in this room. Maybe the view from our campus on the other side of the street is better because you can see the mountains, which hopefully maybe you'll make it to that campus next.
That's for UT, right?
No, across the street was actually for secondary.
Oh.
Yeah, and so we had an English language center and the secondary program across the street. But then, of course, when we went online, we weren't using that space at all, and so we rented it out to someone else.
Oh.
And so they're going to be in there until the end of December, and then we can go back in. But unfortunately, even if you're not using a space, they still charge you rent. So we were trying to find a way to get some of that money back because it's expensive. Anyway, you don't care about that. So the flat Earth. So our experience of Earth is flat, right? Even though we know that it's a round ball, right? But of course, people didn't always think it was a round ball because, of course, their experience told them that the Earth was flat, right? It looks flat. If you get up on a hill, it still looks pretty flat. If you put a ball down on the ground, it doesn't roll away, right? If you go, to the other side of Vancouver Island and look, you can't see Japan, right? So there was kind of people's kind of experience of the world was flat. But again, we know it to be round, right? I talked about some of these things here in terms of knowledge being counterintuitive, and some of these statements are things that people say, right? And again, some of them feel like they're true. Some of them are things that we would like to be true. Some of them are just flat wrong, right? But they're all kind of overgeneralizations and misleading. And they're things that people say because they feel like they should be right, right? They feel like, oh, I see people as individuals, which is good, right? You should see people as individuals. Everyone is unique. Everyone should be treated as the unique individual they are, right? But the social groups that they belong to does influence their life, right? Whether we like that fact or not, that's true, right? Whether you're sitting out there and you're a man or a woman, your life has been influenced by the fact that your gender is what your gender is, right? You would have had a different life as another gender, right? Yeah, and so some of these kind of fit into the category of knowledge being counterintuitive because, again, they feel like they're true, or we might want them to be true, but for the most part, they're kind of not, right? They're idealized ideas of what we would like things to be, or they're ways that we think we are or we would like to be. I always treat everyone the same. No, you don't. Nobody does. Nobody does. White males are not in the minority. Women are not as sexist as men. We'll get to that later. Yeah, so some of these are just wrong. I introduced opinions very quickly, but I'll just leave those for now because I'm going to come back to them. Okay, so this idea of critical theory looks at knowledge in a way that, we said earlier, that it is socially constructed. Okay, so the things that we know and the way that we know them is connected to our culture and connected to history. Okay, so facts are still facts, right? Gravity is still a thing, right? Gravity is still a thing. Facts are facts, but the way in which they are presented to us, or the reason why we know them in the first place, are connected to power structures in society. Okay? And so I'll try and show you an example of this. Okay? Okay, quick. Hang on, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Okay, quick question. Who is this guy?
I have no idea.
No idea? If we could only do a Google image search with our eyes, right? We could figure out.
Looks familiar, but
You may have seen his picture before. To be honest, I'm not really sure that I would have been able to pick this guy out of a lineup. And maybe for students who are not from North America or from Europe, he's probably not that big of a deal.
I think I've learned about history class.
Yeah?
That was years ago.
Good morning, Harry. Yeah, so this is Christopher Columbus, right? And so hopefully you've heard his name. He's kind of an important historical figure here in North America because he's the first European to arrive here in North America. So in 1492, he lands in what they call the New World, right? He sets out from, I forget if it's Spain or Portugal, on a bit of an exploration trip, right? And do I have a map next? Yeah. So this was kind of the map of the world in 1492. This is their best guess of what the world looked like. It's pretty bad, but also when you can't see things from space or from a plane or anything, it's actually pretty good, I think. And of course, the Europeans were doing a lot of trading with India at the time, and so there was lots of money to be made trading with India. But unfortunately, to get your products from India to Europe, you had to sail around the bottom coast of Africa there. And the southern coast of Africa, the seas are very treacherous. There's lots of storms and wind, and lots of ships wind up going down and sinking. And so if your ship sinks, you kind of lose your you lose your money, right? And so people are going bankrupt. And so lots of merchants are interested in finding a better way to India, if there is one, because that one's really dangerous. And so, of course, Columbus sets out, sails around, thinking that, well, if I just go the other way, I should bump into India, right? But of course, Europeans didn't know that there were two more continents in between India and Europe, right? North America and South America. And so Christopher Columbus set sail. He bumped into the New World in about 1492, so maybe about 600 and some odd years ago, almost 700 years ago. He landed in a place that they later called Hispaniola, which I think now is either Haiti or the Dominican Republic. So that's where he landed first. But of course, a pretty important historical figure for us in North America, because his discovery of the New World kind of, well, it changed the people's understanding of the world, but it also led to the colonization of those continents, right? So all of those countries that we know today from North and South America were kind of formed as a result of Columbus's voyage, right? Columbus's discovery. So, prior to today, who had heard of Christopher Columbus before? Yeah? Okay, so he's well known enough. Yeah, we know who he is.
I haven't seen him before.
No?
Since primary.
Oh.
Primary.
Since-
He kind of looked familiar, but
Yeah?
forgot that he's Christopher Columbus.
Okay, so I gave you a little bit of I said a little bit of a blurb about who he was, but what do you remember about Christopher Columbus and beyond what I told you? Well, like, what did they teach you in primary school?
Killed
He was killed? Okay.
by Aboriginal people or something like that when he came to the like how he called it, like India.
Yeah, okay.
Like that.
Okay. So the idea that he was killed by Aboriginal or Indigenous people when he arrived. Okay. What else did we learn?
I think I remember that he made a few trips, right? Like not only one. I think there was one, like maybe in, I forgot the year, but he made a couple of trips. I remember seeing the map of the routes that he traveled.
Yeah, made a few trips, right? Because of course, once he discovered the New World, he had to go back and tell people, right? He couldn't just text them and say, "OMG, you'll never guess," and then like send them a TikTok of his guys dancing on the beach. No, I don't know. Okay, so yeah, he did make several trips, right? At the very least, he had to go back and tell people what he had found, right? Did make several trips. What else do we remember about him?
He thought, I don't know where he went, but he thought it was India. He traveled somewhere, but he thought it was India, but it wasn't.
Right.
That's
So yeah, when he first arrived here, he definitely thought that he was in India for a little while. Of course, he called the indigenous people he encountered, he called them Indians because he thought he was in India, right? And we don't really use that term anymore here in North America, but for a while we did, and it was connected to Columbus's mistake, really. So yeah, sometimes indigenous or First Nations people are referred to as Indian. They have no connection to India itself
Yeah.
beyond the fact that Columbus didn't know what he was talking about. But yep, so that's true. What else do we know about him?
Can't remember.
Yeah, long time ago, right?
Yeah, 5 years ago.
Well, that's good morning. That's mostly. Arad, what do you know about Christopher Columbus? Anything?
Explored USA.
Yeah. Okay.
I know that the first he explored USA and Canada. He found that Canada is in India, so because he was looking for India,
Yep.
so he called the people living in Canada Indians.
Yeah, so he didn't actually explore the US and Canada so much. So most of where he was kind of in the Caribbean islands, right? But of course, once people knew that there was something between Europe and India, more explorers started coming over and looking at the USA, looking at Canada, exploring South America. Um, and so so that's the story, right? That's the Columbus story, more or less, right? But oh yeah, and so he sailed over in ships that look like this. Can't imagine sailing across an ocean in a tiny little wooden boat that was, I don't know, seems a little scary.
Yeah.
And here, of course, is an artist's depiction of Columbus arriving in the New World. I doubt it actually looked like that, but I don't know if he's thanking God on his knees there. Maybe he is. And so this is kind of the story, is it not? Columbus is the brave, heroic explorer, sets out from Spain on a dangerous exploration to find a route to India, finds North America instead, demonstrates, of course, that the world is round, right, or either was in an attempt of it. And he has a holiday. So in the US, they celebrate him still October 12th. I think the day, I don't know if it's always October 12th or if the day changes. I'm not sure. We don't celebrate it here in Canada, so, but he has his own holiday in the United States. Okay, so that's kind of the Columbus story, isn't it? Or is there more, right? Because, of course, my point here is that, or the point I was trying to make was that the things that we know and the ways in which we know them are connected to power structures in our society. Okay, and so the question, of course, is that the story or is that the whole story? And if we dig a little deeper, we'll see that there's kind of more to this story than most primary school children like Eunice would have learned, right? And so, again, what we're saying here is that because knowledge is socially constructed, the things that we know are connected to our social context. They're connected to the society we live in. They're connected to who is in power, okay? So, who you think Columbus is kind of depends on who you are. So again, if we ask most primary school children, they'll tell us the Columbus story like we've heard. Eunice, actually remembers learning these things way back when, 40 or 50 years ago, right?
No, fifth grade.
But again, like I said, there's more than meets the eye here. So if you dig a little deeper into Columbus's story, and we're not going to go too deep because he's just an example here. He's a means to an end. You'll see that, for one thing, Columbus was pretty much a horrible person. Okay, so once he made a few voyages back and forth, right? He discovered the New World. He went back to Europe to sort of tell people about it, and then as the Caribbean began to be colonized, Columbus wound up as, I think, the governor of Hispaniola. So this is the island that's now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Columbus was the governor of that island. And in the process of being that governor, he enslaved and murdered a lot of indigenous people. He sold a lot of young indigenous girls into sexual slavery. He was a pretty awful guy. And I know it was the 15th century and people were pretty brutal back then anyway. But even by the standards of the time, Columbus seems to have been a rotten guy, right? Not the kind of guy you would want to celebrate. Right? So there's that, right? There's the idea that, okay, Columbus arrived there, but kind of arrived there by accident, and then, in this sort of early phase of colonization, enslaved and murdered a bunch of people as the governor of Hispaniola. And then I think he was removed because he was so awful. And then I think he was killed, although somebody might have to fact check me on that one. So there's that, right? Columbus, there's historical evidence to suggest that he was actually pretty awful, right? The second thing is that if you look at this from the perspective of kind of white Canadians or white Americans, he's kind of a founding father, right? He's the first person here. You know, we would never have a Canada or a US without the arrival of Columbus. I suspect somebody else would have found it eventually, but Columbus was the one who found it. So he's kind of a founding father. That's why he gets a holiday in the United States. But if you think about him from the indigenous perspective, it's a kind of a different story, right? Because we'll talk about this much later, but indigenous people are the first people in North and South America. So if you go back to about 15,000 years ago in North America and South America, there's basically nobody here. Okay? There's plants, there's animals, but there are no humans, because the humans, we evolved in Africa, we spread out across Asia and Europe, but really we couldn't make it to North America, and of course nobody knew it was there. And so there's no humans in North and South America until about 15,000 years ago. And then I'll explain it to you later, but people managed to migrate into North America, they spread into South America, all these cultures develop, and so by the time Columbus arrives in 1492, indigenous people have been there for thousands of years, right? And they have cultures and languages and ways of living. We don't really know how many indigenous people were in North America when he arrived, but probably hundreds of thousands. And so once he arrives, you know, in a way, that's kind of the beginning of the end for indigenous ways of life, right? We know that, you know, European colonists keep coming to North and South America. They start trading, but eventually they take over. They push the indigenous people aside, and they create countries kind of in the image of European countries, right? So that's definitely the story here in Canada and in the US, but it's also the story in basically every country in North and South America. And so for an indigenous person, Columbus he's not really a great guy, right? Because he sets in motion the end of their way of life, right? Without him, again, somebody would have found it eventually, but without him, they might have continued living their lives, right, on their land and undisturbed by other people. But instead, they had their land taken from them, they had their cultures destroyed, many of them were killed, and they were kind of pushed out of their own land, right? And so for an indigenous person, is that something worth celebrating? Is that something worth having a holiday about? Not really, right? It's like having a holiday for the man who invented coronavirus, right? Not that anyone invented it, but I'm just saying you don't really want to celebrate that, right?
Yeah.
It's caused a lot of havoc. We don't want to. That's not a party, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting, right? Because basically all parts of this story are true, right? Was Columbus a brave explorer? He was definitely an explorer. I would say you would have to be brave to set out across the sea in one of those wooden boats, not knowing exactly where you're going. I think that's pretty brave or stupid. But sometimes the line between those two is very, very fine, right? Yeah, did he discover the New World? Did he discover North and South America? sort of,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So if you discovered the North America, how indigenous people migrated. So I mean, indigenous people, they're the ones that first found that land, aren't they?
Well, yeah, right? Like, so for Europeans, I'm just going to see if the. Probably not going to make a difference.
No difference.
No difference? No, okay. I think the airflow is good, but.
What's it, recorder or?
No, it's recorder.
Oh.
Let's see. So,
So he's not the man who found this place.
right. So the idea that he discovered North and South America is ridiculous to an indigenous person, right? Because they
You were there first.
they were already there. They're like, yeah, we know it's here. This is our home, right? Certainly for Europeans, it's true, right? Europeans didn't know it was there, but of course, indigenous people did know it was there, and they had discovered it thousands of years before, right? But again, we don't think of them as the discoverers of North and South America. We think of that guy, right? I'm going to back up a little bit here. Did he prove the world was round?
So
No?
Doesn't do anything.
What's that?
Doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything to prove that? No?
people used to think that if they go around the world, they might fall off the edges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the earth is flat, and he proves it that I went all around the world. He didn't fall off.
Well, he didn't fall off, but he didn't actually make it all the way around either, did he?
Yeah.
I mean, if he made it to India, then I mean, yes, you've proven that you can go both ways, right? So it works. But he actually didn't get to India, he hit something else. So he didn't really prove that the world was round. But if you didn't think that the world was round, would it be smart to set off and sail east from Europe? No, it's a suicide mission, right? You're gonna
Straight
go
and fall off.
you're gonna go right over the edge, right? That's insane. So again, there's this idea wrapped up in the Columbus story that he proved the world was round, but in fact he did not, right? And in fact, people in Europe already knew the world was round because again, it would be suicide to sail off in that direction unless you believed the world was round, right? So he doesn't really do that either. And again, is he what's that? He just bumped into something, right? He, and I don't have a map to put on the screen, but I think we know that like if you sail west from Europe, you'd have to be, like you're gonna hit it, right? There's nowhere you can't get you can almost not get around North and South America. You're going to run into it. And again, is he the kind of guy that we would want to celebrate? Is he someone who we want to make a statue of and call a hero?
I don't think so.
Well, yeah, if you look a little more deeply into his history, I think you'll see that he's a despicable human being. And even for the 1500s, he's pretty bad, right? So let me just, so who you think Columbus is connected to the society you live in, right? And so what I'm trying to say here is that knowledge is not value free, right? The things you know and the way you know them are connected to the society you live in. Does the society, let's say, does North American society want to tell the story of how Columbus came here and was a horrible person and enslaved and killed a bunch of indigenous people, which led to colonization and the destruction of indigenous cultures all across the continent? Does kind of white North American society want to tell that story? Not really, right? It kind of makes them the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
It makes people like me the bad guy, right? We want to see ourselves as heroes, right? He was a hero. He bravely sailed here as an explorer. He came here, he found a new world, and he started building something, right? And again, we have, if you look at Canada, we built something here, right? And we'll get into this a little bit later, but and I think I'm safe to say this, but Canada's a great country, right? This is a great country. It's not a perfect country, right? But it's a great one, right? And it's a great place to live. And I can't think of many other countries that I would choose to live in before Canada, right? And so, no offense to anyone's country, but I like mine. So, in the process of wanting to tell that story of, yeah, we've done a good job here. We've built something great, right? There was no Canada here before, and we built it. We made it into what it was. And so there's kind of this story about progress and development and creating something great. And Christopher Columbus can fit into that story if we characterize him as a brave explorer who set off and discovered something new and started to build North American society, right? He fits into that story that way. But if we think about him the other way, he doesn't fit into the story anymore, right? He's this awful person who accidentally bumped into North America, enslaved and killed a bunch of people, was really horrible, got killed himself. But despite that, we built a great country, right? It doesn't fit in the story, And so, again, the version of this Columbus story that has a lot to do with who you're talking to, right? And so, again, if you're learning about Columbus, or if you're, not so much anymore, but in the past, if you were just going to a regular Canadian school, you would be talking about Columbus as the brave hero, as the explorer. You wouldn't be talking about him as the horrible human being and the enslaver of peoples, right? You wouldn't be hearing about that. So, yeah, if I've said it here, yeah, if we believe that he's simply an explorer and a trader, we're basically reinforcing the idea that, it justifies our presence here, us Europeans, and it also kind of assumes that, or it reinforces the idea that this discovery is outside of political and ideological interests, right? And again, the discovery of North and South America wasn't really for pure purposes, right? It was all business, right? People were trying to make money, and they were trying to get to India. And when they couldn't get to India, they found another way to make money off of North and South America, right? They found lands that were full of natural resources that they could exploit. They found a continent that was full of people that they could exploit as well, which of course they did. The transatlantic slave trade is a big part of that. And so, let me just see. Yeah, so how you think of him is connected to who you are. And the version that gets taught has to do with who is in power in that society, right? And so, again, we have a very textbook idea of who Columbus is, but if you talk to indigenous people, that's not how they think of him.
Yeah.
You might hear some very strong language from them if you ask about Christopher Columbus, because they don't have any fondness for him. And that's understandable, right? Again, this part of the story is that he proved that the world was round, but again, you would have had to have known that already, right? You would never try to get to India from Europe by sailing west, if that's what you thought the world was, right? Unless you were insane, because there's just no way you're going to make it. You're going to fall off the edge, right? And indeed, the idea that the Earth was round appeared in Europe prior to prior to Columbus's time. But again, the idea of a round Earth versus a flat Earth, that was tied to political and social power structures as well, right? One of the people who fought very hard against the idea of a round Earth was the Roman Catholic Church in Europe. And so the church, if you know your kind of European history, you'll know that the church was immensely powerful through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance. They had become incredibly rich, and so basically in your whatever European country you were living in, there was the king, right, or the queen, or the royalty, and then there was the church, right? And those were the two sources of power in these countries. And the church was also the source of knowledge, right? If you wanted to learn anything, if you wanted to learn to read, it was through the church that you would, right? And if you had if you had questions about, you know, why the world was the way it was, you would go to the church, right? And the church was the source of knowledge, right? And the source of knowledge was up there, right? God would tell you, and the priest would tell you. But what's that?
No, I see.
Yeah. But scientists in the Renaissance, they start to do scientific experiments, right? They start to discover how the world works on its own. And this is an older idea. This is an older Greek idea that, you know, the early Greek philosophers started to look into, and they said, hey, the world doesn't operate the way it does because the gods make it happen, right? It doesn't rain because, you know, the gods are crying or whatever. It rains because of natural processes, right? And if we observe carefully, then we can figure it out, right? We can figure out how the world works. And so that's kind of the beginning of science back in ancient Greece. But here in the Renaissance, these European scholars have kind of rediscovered that idea, and they're doing it, right? They're trying to observe the world and figure out how it works. And one of the things they figure out, of course, is that, hey, we've done these experiments, and we don't think the world is flat. We think the world is round, right? And, you know, an easy experiment that even you can do is watch a boat sailing away from you on the ocean, right? What happens? Goes over the edge, right? If you watch the sails, nobody sails boats anymore, but it'll actually look like it disappears, right? Because it's going over the edge, right? And there's lots of little experiments you can do to sort of demonstrate that the world is round. And so people like Copernicus and other Renaissance scholars were figuring this stuff out. But the church was pushing back hard against it, right? Because again, knowledge came from them, right? And if the church was wrong about the earth being flat, well then, what else are they wrong about, right? The idea of a round earth threatened their power, right? It threatened their ability to control information, right? And so, again, the church pushed back really hard against this idea. And so the earth being round and the idea that the earth is not the center of the solar system, right, which was also an earlier idea, which has since been debunked. Both of those ideas the church resisted, right, because their social and political power was based on them being right about these things. And so when other people came forward with ideas that conflicted, they tried to suppress those ideas. But again, you know, the idea that Christopher Columbus proved the world is round is kind of centered in the idea that progress and science and knowledge, all of that stuff comes from the West, right? We kind of like to believe that the West is the source of knowledge and science and things like that. But again, if you look at lots of other cultures, well, they already thought of the world as round, right? Lots of indigenous cultures are here. The Greeks are there. They thought the world was round quite early. The Maya and the Aztec and the Inca, they're all from Central and South America. They're indigenous peoples of those areas. They thought the world was round. Various other cultures had kind of figured this out or conceptualized the world as round. So actually, the Europeans were pretty late to the game, right? The Europeans the Europeans thought the Earth was flat until very recently, even when other cultures already thought of it as being round. But the Columbus story allows the West to say, "Oh yeah, we figured it out, right? We're the ones who are so smart with our science, and we figured out the Earth is round." But again, they were kind of not the first ones to figure that stuff out, right? Other cultures had it right earlier. And so, again, the idea of Columbus discovering the round Earth kind of centers the idea of science and progress in the West, right? Which, again, is something that we still, to this day, I think, like to think of. I think we like to think of the West as more civilized, whatever that means, as more technologically developed, right? And again, whether those things are true that's another story, but we like to think of ourselves that way. And the Columbus story helps us to feel that way because it centers the discovery of that round Earth in Europe, right? But again, yes, Europeans figured it out, but they're not the first. But what's interesting is that the people who still believe in a flat Earth, they kind of attach meaning to this as well. And I used to have a video in the slideshow here, and I won't show it. I won't show it now because I don't have it here anymore. But if you listen to some of these flat earthers, so people who still believe the Earth is flat, of course they think it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, right? But when you hear them talk, it's interesting because they almost feel like, well, it's all about like kind of the meaning of life, right? It's about like, why are we here? And so to them, to some of the flat earthers anyway, if you think about, okay, well, Earth is round, right? We're just one little planet in one little solar system. There's billions of planets in the entire universe and galaxy. We're flying through space at, 1,000,000 miles a minute. We're all, evolved from monkeys, and who knows what's happening. And it's a very kind of unsettling, kind of disconnecting idea about what's going on this planet, right? Our experience is, we're having an experience here, right? We have these lives, and yet, the greater scheme of it is that we're just little tiny organisms on a little speck of a planet in the middle of nowhere, right? And that's kind of not a super comforting idea, right? They would rather believe that, that we're here for a purpose, right? That some kind of creative supernatural power, God, or whatever you want to think about, has created us and has created this earth and has put us on it, and that there's some sort of meaning here, right? Something is happening, right? There's some sort of reason for us to be here, right? And so for them, the flat earth is connected to those ideas of meaning and the idea that a creator put us here, right? And so again, it's a little difficult to explain, and I'm not sure I really can, but their idea that the earth is flat is connected to meaning as well. It's just that they're not, they don't really have power in society, and so most people kind of roll their eyes and say, gee, these people are insane, right? But they have a version of a story that is tied to meaning themselves, right? A meaning for themselves. I wanted to take just 2 seconds. I'll give you a break here in a minute. Just 2 seconds to talk about conspiracy theories. And I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about conspiracy theories more in this course. We might, depending on what kind of things happen. But I wanted to sort of give you a definition of a conspiracy theory because there are lots of them out there. Can anyone name any conspiracy theories?
The only one I know is the Princess Diana. Is it Princess or what? I'm not too sure, but that's the one I know.
What's the Princess Diana theory?
The one like that she's not actually dead or something, or like
Oh,
that one. That's the only one I know.
okay. So the idea, how is she? So the idea that Princess Diana is not dead. How can we know that she's not dead, or why is she not dead?
No idea. I just remember watching a video. Oh, it's actually is it called Royals or something? They actually killed her or something. I'm not too sure.
Oh,
That's what I watch.
Okay.
It's not me thinking of.
okay. So there's maybe some theories about the fact that Princess Diana is not dead, or there's accusations that she may have been purposely murdered. Oof. Okay. What other Look at this one. Adon says Nikolai Tesla's time machine, and which Trump's great grandfather once used. Wow, I never heard that one. So, Trump's great grandfather went forward and told Trump to be an idiot. I don't know. Sorry. I've never heard that one, but it sounds pretty interesting. Other conspiracy theories that are out there. We must have heard of some. There's that whole QAnon thing, right? Does anyone know about QAnon? No? Insane. It's crazy. What else is there? There's conspiracy theories about there's microchips in the vaccine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
one.
so when you get your COVID vaccine, they're like
Yeah.
injecting you with a
Magnet
microchip
stuck there, right?
or a magnet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of this theory about singers that can die.
Oh, Michael Jackson, right?
Oh, okay. About
Michael Jackson.
yeah, about
That's
singer.
one.
What's the Michael Jackson one?
They said someone saw him alive or something.
Oh, okay.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that with Elvis Presley too, although he's
That's all I heard of mine. That's all related to. All of them are related to.
they're all related to
Illuminati.
yeah.
They're all in some part related to that. I mean that they give them power, and then like after they don't obey the rules.
Right.
Just like
Oh, and then
get out.
Alright.
Get out.
They said celebrities get popular because they join the Illuminati, and if they try to leave, they'll lose popularity or something.
Yeah, it's like K-pop and
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Illuminati, right, and the idea that somehow they're making singers popular, and then
They
if
sell their soul to the devil or something.
oh, okay, and then if they don't do what they're told,
I read one theory that Ferrari Enzo was reborn as Messi Alonso.
They just like, I mean, like an
Weird.
example, an obvious example is just Eminem, because he has been famous for a lot of years, but
Yeah.
right now,
oh,
not
so
being good.
he somehow crossed the Illuminati, and so now he's not
They said Justin Bieber too. I don't
Justin
know.
Bieber.
Is he good?
Bieber. Are you a believer?
Oh, Illuminati? Oh no.
No, of Justin Bieber.
Oh, no.
No.
I used to like his song back when I was like 7.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty embarrassing to think about.
It's okay. He's not the Canadian we're most proud of. Let's say that. But, right. So these conspiracy theories, whether it's QAnon, you can look it up later. It's bizarre. Illuminati type stuff. Celebrities who are maybe not dead or maybe are dead but were murdered, or all of these things, or the microchip thing. All of them kind of are similar in a way. They're all similar in a way in that there's some sort of like thing going on behind the scenes, right? There's powerful people who are in charge of the world, right? But nobody knows who they are, right? And it's all very hush
United
hush.
Kingdom family.
What's that?
United Kingdom family.
United Kingdom family?
Who was it? Like
Oh, the royals.
dollars, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And about the Area 51.
Oh yeah, Area 51, right?
Is it
the
real?
the crash landing of aliens, well, the alleged crash landing of aliens in 1947, right? And all of these conspiracy theories, again, they have this idea that somehow there are powerful people behind the scenes. Nobody knows who they are. They're controlling things. They have power, and yeah, they're the ones who are secretly in charge, but nobody knows, right? And again, the problem with many of these conspiracy theories is that there's no evidence for any of them, right? And then when you say to conspiracy theorists, well, there's no evidence for that. Sometimes there's maybe circumstantial stuff, right? But the idea is that, oh well, of course there's no evidence, because if there was evidence, then they wouldn't be able to stay in power, right? So the thing kind of reinforces itself. The lack of evidence for something becomes proof that it is actually true, right? For them, anyway. It doesn't really work like that with real science. Lack of evidence is not, does not really mean anything. But for conspiracy theorists, the fact that there's no clear evidence means, well, of course, because these people are very secretive. So, yeah, and you get stuck, right? You get stuck in this sort of thing. And I think they're. Maybe I'll ask you this, and then I'll give you a break. Why do you think people believe some of these theories? Because some of them are quite bizarre, right? Some of them are quite bizarre. Why do people believe these things, do you think?
Because their interest.
It grows their interest?
Yeah, like they find it really interesting, and they think that if it happened, it will really change the history. So they might want to believe it because they want it to happen.
Okay. So they might be sort of interested at the beginning because the stories are quite fantastic, but then they might just find it interesting and they might want to believe.
Power.
What's that?
Power.
What do you mean power?
For example, when you improve an idea, when you make an idea, you're making a group, maybe a group of people agree with your idea. So like you make a group, you make a big whole idea, and something strong, because idea makes people think about it. I agree with it or not. So if they agree, it's like they make a collaborate, and it is strong.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So the idea that if you create some sort of conspiracy theory, maybe you can create a community of followers that you'll
create a point of view, you can make some people.
yeah, you'll kind of be in charge, right? You'll be the guy, the leader, right? And the leader that knows something that other people don't, right? Which is, again, that's a power thing too, right? Knowing things that other people don't know is a powerful thing, right? Anything else? Why people might want to believe some of these things?
Maybe they're influenced by the people around them. Maybe they think that.
Sure.
But the majority of the people are doing this might be true.
That's the concept, not the idea.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Because people don't even look at the evidence, they just like do whatever people are doing.
yeah, following.
Yeah, following the majority group.
Following other
So
people.
people don't like single you out because you don't follow the person.
Right? So people may believe it just to kind of fit in with
Yeah.
the crowd or the group. They may assume that other people know more than them, and so if
People believe what they see, so whatever.
Yeah.
Just tell them, this is nice.
Maybe the evidence of the photos of the proof or something.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a little bit of proof available, right? There's just enough to, you know, like a picture of an alien's hand or something, and it's like, oh, there it is, right? That's enough to go on. And of course, for people who want to believe, that's enough, right? That's enough for them. Yeah, Kayla says here, I think believing in conspiracy theories and being suspicious about the actions of others is in some ways quite an adaptive thing to do. Well, it's certainly true that people have, a lot of people have lost faith in, you know, the traditional things that we would have trusted, right? Like religion or the government, and even teachers, right? The education system. People have kind of lost trust in those things, and so, you know, if you can't get the truth from those places, where does it come from, right? And so, some people find, you know, these other explanations of the world to kind of latch onto, right? So that's a good point, Kayla. And Jesse here says some conspiracy theories might actually show some evidence that make it seem true. Yeah, right. Most conspiracy theories have some sort of bone they can throw people, right? They can say, here's your evidence, right? And does anyone know about Bigfoot or Yetis?
Oh, picture of the big feet that step on the ground.
Yeah. So for a long time in kind of the Himalayas and even here in the Pacific Northwest, there are stories about some sort of giant, giant ape-like creature that walks on 2 feet. And yeah, we've seen like footprints,
Yeah.
we've seen hair, we've seen a couple of pictures. None of them, none of them have stood up to science, right? The hair they find always belongs to bears. The footprints are usually found to be fake. The pictures are always blurry. What's that? They're maybe not polar bears because they're white, but grizzly bears for sure, or black bears will have fur like this. And so it's always, there's no evidence for it. But people who really believe in Bigfoot say, oh, that's because he's so secretive,
Yeah.
And again, it's the conspiracy theory, right? The reason we don't have any evidence is because, oh, they're so cautious, and it's like, no, you can't, like, everybody has a smartphone on them with a really good camera at this point. If there was Bigfoot running around, somebody would have gotten a good picture of him by now. But again, the only pictures we have are like 50 years old, and they're probably fake. I'm just going to look at this really quick here. So Kayla says some conspiracy theories have evidence which make us more curious. A lot of people think Michael Jackson is alive because there are pictures of him going out of a car. Yes. So we do see some of this evidence showing up, right? And from a scientific point of view, it's not really great evidence, but for people who want to believe, that's what it is, right? It's like, there's the proof, right?
There could be some fan follower of Michael Jackson who really look like exactly him.
Yeah.
Sure. Well.
It might be like it's not Michael Jackson, maybe it's a fan of Michael Jackson.
Look-alike.
His look-alike, and get up like Michael Jackson.
I don't know how many people look like him after all that plastic surgery, but I see your point. Okay, that went a little long. I meant to give you a break. Let's have a 10-minute break. Thank you, online people, for contributing. I appreciate that. Take a break. We'll come back and I've just got a few more things to share with you. Okay? All right, and we are back. So we ended off, of course, talking about conspiracy theories, but before that, I was trying to make the point to you that things that we know and the way in which we know them have a lot to do with power structures in society, right? And whether it's the story of Christopher Columbus, whether it's the idea of whether the Earth is flat or round, and of course it's round. All of those things are either taught to us in a way or taught to us for the reason that it supports the power structure in society, right? So, here's another example for you. I haven't taught Social Studies 11 for a while, but when I did, we did a whole unit on basically Canadian democracy, right? So I taught students, how Canada's government system operated, how elections worked, how we elected new leaders, and of course we're in an election right now, as you may or may not know. How people went about voting, and then once those people were voted in, how the government kind of operated. And why did I teach all of that stuff to those students, do you think?
So we get to know more about the country they're in.
Yeah. Yes, but more than that, why did I teach them about all of those democratic things in Canada? Because what? To make them aware, yes, definitely. But who tells me what to teach? Government does, right? With certain, I've got some elbow room to do what I want, right? But the government basically tells me what to teach. And why would they want to teach democracy to a bunch of students? Yeah, right? Canada is a democracy, right? And the government wants Canadian citizens and people living in Canada to kind of understand the democratic process, right? It wouldn't make any sense if I was teaching all these students communism, would it?
Yeah.
No, right? I teach about communism, but I don't teach them communism because the Canadian government doesn't want you to be a bunch of communists. They want you to be a bunch of Democrats, right? People who understand how the system of democracy works, right? So the whole reason that's taught has to do with the power structure in Canada, right? And again, everything you're taught has something to do with that, right? The way that society works and who is in control, they're the ones who decide more or less what you learn in here, right? And again, I have some elbow room so I can present things the way I want to, but you are taught things for a reason, right? And that teaching about democracy is done for a reason as well. All right, so we talked about conspiracy theories. Again, there are lots of them. They're quite bizarre. Most of them really have no substantial evidence, because if they did, they wouldn't really be conspiracy theories. They would just be the way things are. But I would suggest that often people kind of start to believe these theories because they want to understand how the world works, right? And sometimes the world is crazy, right? And unpredictable and hard to know what's going to happen next. And maybe there is some comfort in feeling like somebody is in control, right? And right? Like what's going on, right? And maybe that feels a little better than, the idea that, it's a little bit chaotic and nobody really knows what's going on, right? So let's see where we are here. I've kind of lost my train of thought. So I'm going to jump here. So when we think about knowledge and when we think about information, one good thing to kind of think about is like, okay, well, if this is true, then who benefits from this knowledge, right? whose lives are enriched by knowing this thing or hearing about this thing in this particular way, and whose lives are limited by it. Okay, and so with the Christopher Columbus example, we see that, and yes, sorry, Adon, that is correct. I was a little late on that. With the Christopher Columbus example, white Europeans benefit from the classic story of Christopher Columbus, right? And the indigenous perspective, their experience is kind of pushed aside, right? And we don't really hear about it at all. Okay, so this is kind of the positionality thing. Who you are affects who you see or how you see things. And so in this case, who you are affects how you see Christopher Columbus, or at least it can anyway, until you kind of have all the facts for yourself, right? And so again, I'll leave it to you to decide who Christopher Columbus is, brave explorer or awful human being, right? There's obviously more to his story. I haven't really told you the whole thing. But again, who you are and who is in power in your society determines what kind of things you know and the way in which you know them as well. Okay? I'm going to pause for a second there. Does that make sense? Does that feel like yeah? When I say that, the things that you know and the way in which you know them has to do with who's in power in your society, does that ring any bells for you? Does that make you think of any certain things from either this country or from your own country? Things that you were taught, or the way in which you were taught things that has to do with sort of the powerful group, whoever that is?
In the way that they want.
Okay, give me a little bit more than that.
For example, so they teach you things
Yeah.
that they have benefit on it.
Hope.
Change the history.
Right.
He was bad and he was good. Things like this. These things are so much done.
In Iran? Yeah. And that's, to be honest, Arad, that's probably something that happens in lots of countries, right? Is that historical figures are constantly reinterpreted, right? Depending.
The amount is different. So I'm talking that the amount is
The amount?
yeah, the amount of bullshit.
Oh, so there's a lot of, let me know if I'm understanding you correctly, but yeah, sort of making like historical figures like who you need them to be. Yeah. Like, are they a bad guy or a good guy? Well, it kind of depends on what you need them to be at the moment. Is that kind of what you're thinking about, or?
Changing the point of view of making all people think the way that they want.
Yeah.
Like just words.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and some, I think every country engages in that a little bit. But yeah, some countries are very invested in having their people think a certain way, right? And think certain things. And it sounds like Iran is like that, yes? I feel like China is like that pretty strongly, that they want their citizens to think about things in the correct way. Definitely North Korea. Yep, definitely North Korea. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so some opinions or points of view or even facts are not allowed to be. Yeah.
Said?
Yeah, it's yeah, and that's probably a more extreme example of the kind of thing we're talking about, but still that very much true, right? The things the thing Sorry, go ahead.
That's why like people like scared they just get on with it.
Yeah.
That's
That's a
the
lot of
only
people.
reason. And then a lot of these just not as in dark is scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of places in the world that are like that. And the scary thing for me anyway is that there are other places that are becoming more like that, right? Afghanistan is probably one where a certain ideology is going to be imposed on the Afghans. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, but that's the Taliban certainly wants Afghanistan to operate in a certain way and its people to behave in a certain way and think certain things. But even in the United States, I feel like that's kind of happening, right? There are certain things that can and can't be said, and there's one side who, is very strongly against the other side, and yeah. But it's yeah, it's good to think about either in sort of more kind of extreme examples or in more subtle examples the fact that knowledge is not the things are not simply objective and disconnected from society or from political power, right? They're very connected to it. And even though some things are absolutely facts, sometimes the facts or the way that the facts are put together has to do with who's in power, right? And so it sounds like some of us have some firsthand experience with that situation, right? Let me see. Okay, so what do we do, right? How are we going to approach things in this course? There's 5 things. I'm not going to go through them all today. I'll briefly explain them to you tomorrow, but I think I don't want to burn you out too early in the course. And again, this first stuff is a little bit more complicated and difficult to deal with. So this is what we'll talk about tomorrow. These kind of 5 guidelines for engaging in a constructive way. And people on social media who like to type in all caps at other people can probably learn from this too. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna strive for intellectual humility. I'll talk about that tomorrow. We're gonna try and recognize the difference between informed knowledge and opinion. More on that tomorrow and next week. We're gonna try to let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broader social patterns, okay? So part of the focus on this class is society as a whole, and so we have to be able to sort of see society as a whole, not just the way we see it, right? Because as we've talked about with positionality, sometimes we see certain things, but then there's other things that we don't see, and very few of us can see the whole picture, right? It's very difficult. This probably won't happen, but if people get defensive, notice that feeling and experience and sort of use it to your advantage. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And then again, recognize how your own positionality informs your perspective and reactions, okay? And so again, don't worry too much about 4 and 5. They don't usually happen in here, but they're worth saying. So I'm going to pause it there. Does anyone have any questions or concerns or things that they would like to ask or say? I'm here to answer all your questions. That is my job. Actually, that's not quite my job, but I'll still do it. Okie dokie. All right. If there are no questions at the moment, I will turn you loose. Come tomorrow, we'll finish up this theory stuff, and we'll I think we'll start talking about socialization, I think. And it'll be Friday, so that'll be good. Do you guys have big weekend plans?
No.
No? You're just gonna
School week.
You're just gonna relax, get some work done,
Probably do laundry.
probably do laundry. Yeah, laundry's always. Yeah.
I want to watch another movie, but I don't know what to watch. Because I already watched Shang-Chi.
You already watched what?
The Marvel movie, the Asian one.
Shang-Chi, how is it?
Oh, very good. I like it.
Yeah? Okay. I'm gonna put it on my list. Any movie recommendations for Eunice? No?
I think there's another Marvel movie coming out, but that's on November, so I have to wait like a while.
Oh, yeah, what's.
Huh? No, I think it's called Eternal.
Oh, the Eternals.
I forgot the guy who played it. I forgot the name, but it looks pretty good. I'll watch it.
It does look okay. Has anyone seen Black Widow yet?
No.
No interest. No
Did
interest.
she sue Disney?
Yeah, I guess she did. Does anyone know about that? That they were.
Heard about it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's in court still.
Yeah. I heard they released her movie like too early, I think, or something. It didn't go according to what she wants.
Yeah. Yeah, that she expected them to do one thing and they did something else. So
Yeah, or maybe they treated her like wrong or something.
I thought it was just about sort of the payment of her contract, because I thought she was going to get Adon says Black Widow was good. I think she was going to get a cut of all of the theater, the box office. Scarlett Johansson was going to get a cut, but then they released it online as well. So a lot of people didn't go see it in the theater, they saw it online, and she didn't get any of that.
She got upset.
So she was like, hey, I thought I was going to get paid this, and now you've released it in this other format, so I'm getting paid less now. So that's fine. I've been watching on Apple TV this series called Ted Lasso.
Never.
I don't know if you guys would like it. I think it's great.
If you watch Apple TV, just watch
Defending
Defending Jacob.
Jacob?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I've seen it come up. What's it about?
It's about a young age boy who's like going through trouble and his parents is
Oh, okay. That sounds very like
and it is in series.
emotionally wrenching. Is it?
No, and the series.
And mysterious.
Yeah, because you don't know what is happening.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, put that on my list too. I got a long list, but I'll put it on.
You finished Friends? Did you watch it?
You know what? That's on our list too.
Oh.
My partner, she loves Friends, and she's seen it all the way through. I think a couple of times. I've seen. Like I was around when it was originally on TV, so I've watched a lot of the episodes, but I've never watched it all the way through, and I haven't seen all of it. So Friends is on my list as well to get through. Who's watching Friends here? I feel like you are.
Finished
No?
it with my mom.
You finished it with your mom?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy it?
It's very funny.
Yeah. We still laugh about the scene where Ross is moving the couch.
Pivot.
Pivot!
Yeah, that one. I know that one.
Pivot! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Yeah, it's a good show. Good show. Okay, that is all for today. Good people. Have a nice afternoon. I will see you tomorrow for Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, bye online people. See you tomorrow.